Welcome back into the Daily Dose. It's week 3 of the Daily Dose. We're thankful for the support so far, and we ask for your continued support as we continue to start, grow, and evolve this new platform here on YouTube. I'm your host, Jeff Hansen, and the show, as always, is brought to you by CougarSportsInsider.com and by Give'emHellBrigham.com. If you have yet to do so, please subscribe to the channel. Take a minute, like this video, maybe share this video. It helps us a ton, and it helps us continue to grow and evolve our content as we move into the future. Thank you so much for your support so far. Today, I want to talk about recruiting. I love recruiting. It's my favorite thing to follow. I've been covering BYU's recruiting efforts for the better part of a decade now, and I've never been more excited about the future of BYU's recruiting. Now, you can't cover recruiting for a specific school without learning a lot about other schools, without learning who the recruiting rivals are, if you will, as BYU, in this case, goes out onto the recruiting trail. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it's been mostly Pac-12 schools that have been the thorn in BYU's side. Schools like Utah, I think that's obvious. Guys like Spencer Fano just last year, Spencer Fano, Hunter Clegg, Dadrian Zipperer, Smith Snowden, guys that BYU would have loved to have on their roster that played just 40 miles north for the Utes. Oregon has been a pain in the backside of BYU in the past. Guys like Kingsley Suamataia, Jackson Powers Johnson, Bram Walden, Harrison Taggart, guys that BYU would have loved to have on their roster that end up going to Eugene. Washington has been kind of a thorn in BYU's side in the past, maybe not as much in the last couple of years, but even guys like Puka Nacua, who ended up at BYU, started out at Washington, Voita Nufi, Jordan Lolohea, guys that BYU wanted. USC and UCLA kind of have been a thorn in the side of BYU, but really those schools have sort of just cherry-picked who they want out of the state of Utah. Carson Ryan, Jay Tufele, Jackson Dart, guys like that BYU would have loved to have USC or UCLA kind of come in, stick their toe in the water a little bit, and then get some of the best talent out of the state of Utah. And Stanford is a name that everybody talks about when you talk about BYU's recruiting rivals. But over the last 3 or 4 years, it hasn't been as big of a deal for BYU. They've won a lot of the time when they go up against Stanford. But still, names like Simi Fehoko, names like Scotty Edwards, I mean, those names ring true, and they are still there. Stanford, absolutely. Still a threat to BYU and always will be. But there's some new names as BYU is moving forward into the Big 12 that are starting to emerge as really big threats for BYU, and particularly as the Cougars are evolving their recruiting strategy and looking to the transfer portal more and more. There's a couple of schools that are really standing out as transfer destinations for the guys that BYU tends to recruit. Tennessee has become a threat. Tennessee is taking a couple of players from BYU's existing roster, Keenan Peely and Gabe Judy Lawley, but it is starting to bleed into the recruiting trail as well. Davis Andrews is a big guy, big name out of American Fork that BYU would love to have, and Tennessee is firmly in the top 6 along with BYU for Davis's services. Aaron Amama has local ties. He's on the recruiting staff at Tennessee. And he's making Utah, he's making Hawaii, he's making the Polynesian Pipeline part of the Tennessee recruiting pitch. It's a long ways to go to get from Utah or California or somewhere out west all the way over to Knoxville, but it's proving to be effective so far. And I think as times evolve and the future comes, Tennessee's going to be a problem for BYU. Baylor is really starting to emerge, and that shouldn't be surprising to anybody. Jeff Grimes and Eric Mateos have been there for a couple of years. They have obvious ties to the state of Utah, but it goes beyond those two. Dave Aranda has coached at Utah State. The head coach of Baylor's program has ties within the state of Utah and ties out west. That's going to be a big deal. And now they've added A.J. Stewart, who was a fantastic recruiter when he was at BYU, did really good things when he was at Oregon State. He's got ties to the BYU traditional recruiting grounds as well. Baylor's going to become a threat. They've already taken guys like the brothers Barrington from BYU, but George Miley and recently A.J. Carter out of the transfer portal that BYU hosted on an official visit and would have loved to add to their secondary in 2023. Baylor, I don't know how often BYU will go head-to-head with Baylor, but it will happen. And probably maybe once or twice a class. There's a guy that BYU and Baylor are going to go head to head for. That's becoming a problem. But maybe more than anybody else, the new competition that nobody's really talking about is Oklahoma State. They've taken guys like Nick Sessions, like Mason Cobb in the past, Jalen Warren from East High School. And now they're still becoming a bigger deal with the transfer portal, taking guys like Justin Kirkland, defensive tackle from Utah Tech that BYU would have loved to have. Isaiah Kema just signed. BYU would have loved to have that offensive lineman out of Texas. Sesi Vailahi, BYU came in late for the running back from West High School, but ultimately Oklahoma State was able to take him and convince him to sign and play in Stillwater. So those three, Tennessee, Baylor, and Oklahoma State, we're starting to see more and more of them as you look at BYU's recruiting targets and the players that BYU would love to add to their roster. And it makes a lot of sense. Guys like Amama, guys like Grimes and Mateos. And at Oklahoma State, Benny Tonga is on the recruiting staff from West Valley. He's got tons of ties into the state of Utah and into the Polynesian community that has been the bread and butter for BYU for so long. So watch out for those names. BYU is going to have to adapt their recruiting strategy. They're going to have to evolve like everybody does, but it's more than just those Pac-12 schools that BYU has to worry about now as the Cougars continue to move forward and further along in their Big 12 progression. More schools like Tennessee and like Baylor and like Oklahoma State are going to become threats for BYU's traditional recruiting tactics. As always, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for tuning into the show. If you have yet to do so, please subscribe to the channel. Please share this video. And until next time, give them hell.